The beam of my flashlight cut through 15 years of accumulated darkness and dust, illuminating something that made my breath catch in my throat. Newspaper clippings, hundreds of them, all carefully cut, mounted, and arranged on the walls like some macabre gallery dedicated to loss and mystery. Woman perishes in mysterious car crash. Police investigate suspicious brake failure. Amanda Harrison. Case remains unsolved. My husband Marcus stood frozen beside me in the doorway of his deceased mother's forbidden room, his face pale in the harsh LED light, as we both stared at what Lillian Harrison had kept hidden from us for 15 years. Jesus Christ, Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible in the stale air. That's Amanda. Amanda, his first wife, the woman who had passed away 6 years before I met him, in what everyone had always described as a tragic accident. The woman whose memory I'd lived with throughout our entire marriage, wondering if I'd ever measure up to Marcus's perfect first love. Now, apparently, she was staring back at us from dozens of yellowed newspaper photographs, her young face frozen in time at 25, surrounded by headlines that suggested her passing had been anything but accidental. Marcus, I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady, despite the fact that my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Why would your mother collect newspaper articles about Amanda's accident? I don't know. His voice cracked slightly. I honestly don't know, Becca. The room was small, maybe 10 by 12 feet, with no windows and a single overhead bulb that had burned out years ago. The walls were covered floor to ceiling with meticulously organized clippings, some faded to brown, others still sharp and clear where they'd been protected from light and air. In the center of the room sat a small wooden desk covered with manila folders, bound notebooks, and what appeared to be a magnifying glass. Freos cortados, I read aloud from one of the Portuguese headlines, my limited language skills from college somehow still intact enough to translate. Cut breaks. Marcus, these articles are suggesting that someone caused Amanda's accident deliberately. That's impossible. Amanda's passing was accidental. The police investigated everything thoroughly. Did they? I moved closer to the wall, scanning the headlines with growing unease. Because these articles seemed to suggest the case was never actually resolved. I heard Marcus's sharp intake of breath behind me, as he apparently found something even more disturbing than newspaper clippings. I turned to see him standing over the desk, holding what appeared to be a leather-bound journal in his trembling hands. Becca, there's a diary here. Whose diary? My mother's. The first entry is dated. Jesus. It's dated 3 days after Amanda's funeral. The implications of what we were discovering began to settle over me like cold fog. Lillian Harrison, the woman who had been my mother-in-law for 10 years, who had baked me birthday cakes and knitted me Christmas sweaters, and never once mentioned Amanda's name in my presence, had apparently been conducting some kind of investigation into her daughter-in-law's passing for decades. Read it, I said, though part of me desperately didn't want to hear whatever secrets Marcus's mother had been keeping in this shrine to his deceased wife. Marcus opened the journal with the careful reverence of someone handling an explosive device, his hands shaking slightly as he found the first entry. October 15th, 1992. He read aloud. Amanda's funeral was today. The police say the investigation is closed, that her passing was accidental brake failure due to poor maintenance. But I know Amanda. She was meticulous about car maintenance. She had the brakes serviced just 2 months ago. I have the receipt. Keep reading. Something is wrong. Something doesn't add up. The police won't listen to an old woman's suspicions, but I know what I know. My daughter-in-law was taken from us deliberately, and I'm going to prove it. The room suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing in around us as the magnitude of what we'd discovered began to sink in. For 15 years, Lillian had kept this room locked and forbidden, protecting some terrible secret about Amanda's accident. For 15 years, she'd lived in this house with us, sharing meals and holidays and family celebrations, all while harboring suspicions that her daughter-in-law had been harmed deliberately. Why didn't she tell anyone? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. If she thought Amanda was harmed intentionally, why didn't she go to the police? Why didn't she tell you? Marcus continued reading, his voice growing more strained with each word. I can't tell Marcus what I suspect. He's grieving, and he needs to believe Amanda's passing was accidental. If I'm wrong, I'll have destroyed his peace for nothing. If I'm right, then someone took my daughter-in-law from us, and they're still out there. Marcus, stop. I couldn't listen to any more. The implications were too terrifying, too overwhelming. If Lillian had been right, if Amanda had been harmed deliberately, then whoever was responsible had been free for 23 years, and Marcus had been living with the belief that his wife's passing was just a tragic accident. But Marcus wasn't listening to me. He was flipping through pages of the diary, his eyes scanning his mother's careful handwriting with desperate intensity. She documented everything, he said, his voice filled with wonder and horror. Police reports, witness statements, maintenance records, insurance claims. Becca, she spent decades investigating Amanda's accident. And she never told you any of this? Never. Not a word. All these years I thought Mom had just moved on, accepted that Amanda was gone and focused on the present. I had no idea she was obsessed, determined. Marcus looked up from the diary, his eyes reflecting the flashlight beam like a nocturnal animal caught in headlights. She was determined to find the truth. I walked around the small room, taking in the scope of Lillian's investigation. The newspaper clippings weren't random. They were organized chronologically, with handwritten notes in the margins connecting details across different articles. There were photocopied police reports, insurance documents, and what appeared to be surveillance photographs of various people I didn't recognize. Marcus, your mother turned this room into a detective's office. This isn't just grief or suspicion. This is a full-scale investigation. But why hide it? Why keep it secret for so long? As if in answer to his question, I found another section of the wall that made my blood run cold. More newspaper clippings. But these weren't about Amanda's accident. These were about other accidents, other mysterious incidents, other cases of unexplained brake failures, all spanning the years after Amanda's passing. Marcus, I said quietly, I think your mother believed whoever was responsible for Amanda's accident didn't stop with just one victim. Some secrets are buried for good reasons. Some doors are locked to protect the innocent rather than hide the guilty. As I stood in that dusty shrine to a woman I'd never met, surrounded by evidence of 15 years of covert investigation, I realized that Lillian Harrison hadn't been keeping Amanda's memory alive. She'd been hunting someone dangerous. And now that she was gone, that person might have no idea that someone had been watching, documenting, and gathering evidence against them for over 2 decades. The question was, what were Marcus and I supposed to do with this information? And more terrifyingly, did whoever harmed Amanda know that we'd just stumbled upon 15 years of evidence that could finally bring them to justice? Marcus's hands shook as he turned the pages of his mother's diary, each entry revealing another piece of a puzzle that neither of us had known existed. The small room felt like it was closing in around us, the weight of 15 years of secrets pressing down from the newspaper-covered walls. Listen to this, Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. November 3rd, 1992. I spoke with Jerry at the auto shop today. He confirmed that Amanda's car had been serviced just 8 weeks before the accident. New brake pads, complete system check. Everything was perfect. Jerry says there's no way those brakes should have failed unless someone tampered with them. I felt a chill run down my spine. Your mother was building a case. There's more. He flipped ahead several pages. December 12th, 1992. The insurance investigator Thompson came by today. He asked strange questions about Marcus and Amanda's marriage, whether they fought, whether there were financial problems. I told him they were perfectly happy, but I could see he didn't believe me. Why would he ask about their relationship unless he suspected what? Marcus couldn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The implication hung in the air between us like a toxic cloud. The insurance investigator had been looking for a motive, which meant he'd suspected that Amanda's accident wasn't an accident at all. I moved closer to one of the walls, studying the newspaper clippings more carefully. Many were from local papers, but some were from larger regional newspapers, and a few appeared to be from national publications. My mother-in-law had been thorough in her research, collecting every article about Amanda's case she could find. Marcus, look at this. I pointed to a series of articles that had been grouped together with red string, like something from a detective's evidence board. These are all from different newspapers, but they're all asking the same questions. Police tight-lipped about Harrison investigation. Family friends, question official accident report. Local woman's demise, sparks community concern. I don't understand. The police told me the investigation was straightforward. Brake failure due to a manufacturing defect. Case closed. But your mother obviously didn't believe that explanation. I found another section of the wall that made my stomach turn. Photographs. Not newspaper photos, but actual surveillance-style pictures that appeared to have been taken secretly. People walking to cars, entering buildings, sitting in restaurants. All of them were labeled with names and dates in Lillian's careful handwriting. Marcus, your mother was following people. He looked up from the diary, his face pale. What do you mean? I mean she was conducting actual surveillance. Look at these photos. She was watching specific individuals and documenting their activities. Marcus joined me at the wall of photographs, his expression growing more disturbed with each image. I don't recognize any of these people. But your mother obviously thought they were important enough to follow around town with a camera. I studied the dates on the photographs more carefully. They spanned years, starting just months after Amanda's accident and continuing right up until about 2 years ago, shortly before Lillian's health began to decline. She was doing this for over 20 years, I said, the magnitude of the situation beginning to sink in. Your mother spent 2 decades investigating your first wife's accident. Marcus returned to the diary, flipping through pages with increasing urgency. Here's something about the photographs. March 15th, 1995. Followed Thompson to his meeting with Walter Harrison. They spoke for over an hour at the diner on Main Street. Walter looked nervous, kept checking his watch. Thompson left first, but Walter sat there for another 30 minutes, making phone calls. Walter Harrison? I repeated. Marcus, that's your father's name. My father met with the insurance investigator? But why? Dad wasn't even involved in the original investigation. I felt a cold realization beginning to form in my mind. Marcus, when did your father pass away? 5 years ago. Why? And when did your mother stop taking photographs of people? Marcus checked the dates on the surveillance photos. About 5 years ago. Right around the time your father passed away. We stared at each other in the dim light, both of us beginning to understand something that neither of us wanted to acknowledge. Lillian's investigation hadn't been focused on random suspects or unknown criminals. She'd been watching specific people, documenting their behavior, and one of those people had been her own husband. No, Marcus said firmly, reading the direction of my thoughts. Absolutely not. My father would never. He couldn't have. Marcus, I'm not saying anything. I'm just noting the timing. But even as I spoke, I was remembering things about Walter Harrison that I'd never thought significant before. His nervousness whenever Amanda's name was mentioned. The way he'd insisted that we never discuss the accident in detail. How he'd always change the subject whenever anyone brought up the investigation. Marcus was reading more entries from the diary, his voice becoming increasingly strained. June 7th, 1996. Walter has been asking questions about what I keep in the locked room. I told him it's just old photos and mementos, but he seems suspicious. I need to be more careful. If Walter knew what I've discovered. If Walter knew what she'd discovered? What? I asked. Marcus flipped ahead in the diary, searching for more recent entries. January 20th, 2000. I finally found the connection. Walter's construction company did work on the brake repair facility just 2 weeks before Amanda's car was serviced there. He would have had access to tools, equipment, knowledge of how the brake systems worked, but I still need proof. The room felt like it was spinning around me. Walter Harrison, Marcus's own father, had potentially been involved in tampering with Amanda's brakes. The man who'd hugged me at family dinners, who'd given me advice about marriage and life, who'd walked me down the aisle when my own father couldn't be there, might have been responsible for his daughter-in-law's demise. This is insane, Marcus said, his voice cracking. My mother suspected my father of causing Amanda's accident? That's impossible. Dad loved Amanda like a daughter. Did he? Or did you just believe he did? I was studying another section of the wall now, one that contained what appeared to be financial documents, bank statements, insurance policies, business records, all photocopied and carefully organized. Marcus, look at this. Your mother was tracking money. The financial documents showed a pattern that was both subtle and disturbing. Large withdrawals from Walter's business accounts in the weeks following Amanda's accident. Insurance payouts that seemed unusually large for the circumstances. Business loans that were paid off with suspicious timing. She was following the money trail, I said, the pieces beginning to come together in my mind. Your mother believed that someone profited from Amanda's accident and that someone was your father. Marcus slammed the diary shut, his face flushed with anger and confusion. I can't listen to any more of this. My mother was obviously having some kind of breakdown, creating conspiracy theories about people she should have trusted. But what if she wasn't having a breakdown? What if she was right? Then that would mean... Marcus couldn't finish the sentence. That would mean your father caused your first wife's accident, and your mother spent 20 years trying to prove it while protecting you from the truth. The silence that followed was deafening. We stood in that small, dusty room surrounded by 15 years of accumulated evidence, both of us struggling to process the possibility that the man we'd thought we knew had been capable of something unthinkable. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a new question was forming. If Lillian had been right about Walter, if she'd actually gathered enough evidence to expose him, then what had happened to that evidence when Walter passed away? More importantly, what had happened to Lillian's investigation after she was the only one left who knew the truth? I picked up one of the manila folders from Lillian's desk, my hands trembling as I opened it to reveal dozens of typed pages covered with dates, times, and detailed observations. The folder was labeled WH, Behavioral Patterns, in Lillian's precise handwriting. Marcus, your mother was documenting your father's behavior for years. I don't want to hear this anymore, Becca. We can't just ignore what we're finding. Look at this. I held up a page dated from 1993. Walter has been drinking more heavily since Amanda's funeral. He becomes agitated whenever anyone mentions the investigation. Last night he was in the garage until 3 a.m., and this morning I found brake fluid spilled on the workbench. When I asked about it, he claimed he was doing routine maintenance on his truck, but his truck was at the shop all week for transmission repair. Marcus turned away from me, his shoulders rigid with denial. My mother was imagining things, connecting dots that weren't there. Then explain this. I pulled out another document, this one a photocopy of what appeared to be a work order. This is from your father's construction company. A job order dated September 15, 1992, for emergency brake system consultation at Murphy's Auto Repair. That's the shop where Amanda had her car serviced. So? Dad's company did work all over town. That doesn't prove anything. Marcus, this work order is dated 3 weeks before Amanda's accident. Your father was doing brake system work at the exact shop where Amanda's car was serviced, just weeks before her brakes failed. I could see the internal struggle playing out on Marcus's face. Part of him wanted to dismiss everything we were finding as the delusions of a grieving woman who'd lost touch with reality. But another part of him was beginning to recognize patterns that he'd never noticed before, or had chosen not to notice. There has to be another explanation, he said weakly. Maybe there is, but your mother didn't think so. I opened another folder, this one containing what appeared to be insurance documentation. Look at this, Marcus. Walter increased his life insurance policy on Amanda just 6 months before her accident. What do you mean, his life insurance policy on Amanda? Apparently your father had taken out a policy on Amanda's life as part of some business partnership agreement. The policy was worth $200,000, and Walter was the beneficiary. Marcus stared at the insurance documents as if they were written in a foreign language. That's impossible. I would have known about a life insurance policy on my wife. Would you have? You were 28 years old, newly married, probably not paying attention to your father's business dealings. And according to this documentation, the policy was structured as part of a business investment that Amanda signed off on without reading the fine print. I found another section of Lillian's investigation that made my blood run cold. A timeline, meticulously constructed, showing Walter's activities in the weeks leading up to Amanda's accident. Marcus, your mother tracked every move your father made in September 1992. The timeline showed a disturbing pattern. Walter had visited Murphy's Auto Repair multiple times in the weeks before Amanda's accident, always on days when the owner wasn't there, always claiming to be doing consultation work that left no official record. He'd also made several trips to automotive supply stores, purchasing items that weren't related to any known construction projects. September 20th, 1992, I read aloud from Lillian's notes. Walter came home with brake fluid on his clothes and his hands. When I asked about it, he said there had been a spill at one of his job sites, but he seemed nervous and immediately went to shower. I found the clothes in the washing machine later, but the stains were already set. Stop, Marcus said, his voice barely audible. Please stop reading. But I couldn't stop. The evidence was too compelling, too carefully documented to dismiss. Lillian Harrison hadn't been having a breakdown or creating conspiracy theories. She'd been conducting a methodical investigation into her own husband's possible involvement in her daughter-in-law's suspicious accident. Marcus, there's something else here. A letter. I pulled out an envelope that had been sealed but never mailed. The address was written in Lillian's handwriting. Detective Ray Morrison, State Police Criminal Investigation Division. She wrote to the state police, but she never sent it. I opened the envelope carefully and began reading the letter inside. Dear Detective Morrison, I am writing to provide you with evidence regarding the case of Amanda Harrison, who perished in a car accident on October 12, 1992. I have reason to believe that my husband, Walter Harrison, was involved in tampering with Mrs. Harrison's vehicle prior to the accident. Marcus sank into the small chair beside his mother's desk, his face in his hands. She was going to accuse my father of deliberate harm, but she didn't send the letter. She kept it here with all the other evidence. I continued reading Lillian's unsent letter to the detective. I understand that without concrete physical evidence, these allegations may seem like the speculation of a grieving relative. However, I have documented patterns of behavior, financial motives, and circumstantial evidence that I believe warrant further investigation. My husband had both the means and opportunity to tamper with Amanda's brake system, and he had recently increased his financial stake in her continued well-being through insurance policies that would benefit him in the event of her untimely passing. Why didn't she send it? Marcus asked. If she really believed Dad was responsible, why didn't she turn him in? I found the answer in another diary entry dated just a few days later. I cannot send the letter to Detective Morrison. If I am wrong about Walter, I will have destroyed our family for nothing. If I am right about Walter, then I am married to someone who caused Amanda's accident, and Marcus will have to live with the knowledge that his father took his wife from him. Either way, Marcus loses everything he has left. I have to find another way. Another way to what? To protect you, I said quietly. Your mother chose to protect you, rather than seek justice for Amanda. The weight of what Lillian had sacrificed was beginning to settle over both of us. She had spent decades living with the suspicion that her husband had caused her daughter-in-law's accident, but she had chosen to keep that suspicion to herself rather than destroy Marcus's relationship with his father and his faith in his family. She lived with this secret for 20 years, Marcus said, his voice filled with anguish. She suspected my father of causing Amanda's accident, but she never said anything because she was trying to protect me. And she kept collecting evidence, documenting everything, just in case. Just in case what? I found the answer in one of the final entries in Lillian's diary, dated just 2 years before her passing. Walter's health is declining rapidly. The doctors say he has 6 months, maybe less. I have decided that when Walter passes away, I will give all of this evidence to Marcus. He deserves to know the truth about Amanda's accident, but only after Walter is gone and can no longer be hurt by the allegations. She was planning to tell you everything after your father passed away. But she never got the chance? Because she became ill herself just months after your father's funeral. We sat in that small room surrounded by 20 years of accumulated evidence, both of us struggling to comprehend the magnitude of what Lillian had sacrificed to protect our family. She had lived with terrible suspicions about her own husband, had documented evidence of potential wrongdoing, but had chosen to carry that burden alone rather than destroy the people she loved. Marcus, I said gently, what do you want to do with all of this? He looked around the room at the walls covered with newspaper clippings, the desk full of evidence, the folders containing 20 years of investigation into his father's possible involvement in his first wife's suspicious accident. I don't know, he admitted. I honestly don't know. I spent the next hour methodically going through the remaining folders on Lillian's desk while Marcus sat in stunned silence, occasionally looking up at the newspaper-covered walls as if seeing them for the first time. Each folder revealed another layer of his mother's investigation, another piece of evidence that painted an increasingly disturbing picture of Walter Harrison's potential involvement in Amanda's accident. Marcus, I found something else, I said, opening a folder labeled Post-Incident Patterns. Your mother documented your father's behavior changes after Amanda's accident. What kind of changes? I read from Lillian's careful notes. November 1992. Walter has become obsessively neat about his truck and tools. He cleans his vehicle every other day now, sometimes twice a day. Before Amanda's accident, he would go weeks without washing it. He also reorganized his entire workshop, disposing of tools and equipment that he claimed were worn out, but appeared functional to me. Dad did become really particular about his truck after Amanda's accident, Marcus admitted reluctantly. I always thought he was just dealing with grief in his own way. Your mother thought it was evidence of guilty consciousness. I turned to another page. December 1992. Walter has started attending church every Sunday, something he never did before Amanda's passing. He also began making large donations to the church and local charities. When I asked him about the sudden generosity, he said he wanted to do good in Amanda's memory, but the amounts seem excessive for our financial situation. The charitable donations, Marcus said quietly. I remember those. Dad started giving away thousands of dollars every year. Mom was always worried we couldn't afford it. According to this, your mother thought he was trying to buy absolution. I found a section of the folder that made me pause. Lillian had documented not just Walter's behavior, but also his health issues that had developed in the years following Amanda's accident. January 1993. Walter has been experiencing severe insomnia since Amanda's funeral. He paces the house at night, often ending up in the garage where he stares at his tools for hours. I pretended to be asleep last night and watched him take apart and reassemble a brake caliper over and over, his hands shaking the entire time. He had nightmares, Marcus said suddenly. For years after Amanda passed away, Dad would have nightmares that woke up the whole house. He said they were about work stress, but they seemed more intense than that. Your mother documented the nightmares too. I showed him another page of notes. The nightmares always involve mechanical failures, brake systems, accidents that he says he's trying to prevent, but can never stop. He wakes up shouting about checking the lines and making sure they hold. When I ask him about the dreams, he claims he can't remember them, but he's drenched in sweat and his hands shake for hours afterward. Marcus stood up and walked to the wall of newspaper clippings, staring at a particularly large headline that read, "Brake failure claims local woman's life." If what Mom documented is true, he said slowly, then my father lived with guilt about Amanda's accident for 20 years, and my mother lived with suspicion about my father for 20 years. Our entire family was built on this terrible secret that nobody could talk about, and your mother chose to protect you from knowing any of it. I opened another folder, this one containing what appeared to be financial records spanning several years after Amanda's accident. The pattern that emerged was both subtle and telling. Marcus, look at this. Your father's business became much more successful after Amanda's accident. What do you mean? I mean, he started getting bigger contracts, better clients, higher paying jobs. According to these records, his annual income tripled between 1993 and 1995. Dad always said business picked up because word got around about the quality of his work. But your mother traced the source of the new business. Look at these client lists. I showed him pages of documentation that Lillian had somehow obtained. Most of the new high-paying contracts came from people connected to the insurance industry, the same industry that paid out Amanda's life insurance policy without questioning the circumstances of her accident. The implications were becoming clearer and more disturbing. If Lillian's suspicions were correct, Walter hadn't just caused Amanda's accident for the immediate insurance payout. He'd somehow leveraged that situation into long-term business advantages, possibly through connections made during the investigation or through people who had reasons to keep the true circumstances of Amanda's accident from being examined too closely. There's something else here, I said, finding a section of documents that I'd almost missed. Correspondence. The correspondence file contained photocopies of letters, bills, and business documents that Lillian had apparently collected over the years. Most were routine, but several stood out as significant. Here's a letter from an insurance investigator to your father, dated 6 months after Amanda's accident. Mr. Harrison, thank you for your cooperation during our investigation of your daughter-in-law's tragic accident. Your technical expertise regarding brake system failures was invaluable in helping us understand the mechanical factors involved. We hope the family finds some comfort in knowing that Amanda's passing was the result of a rare but documented manufacturing defect rather than any preventable human error. So Dad helped the insurance company understand what happened to Amanda's car. According to this letter, your father provided the technical explanation that allowed the insurance company to classify Amanda's accident as an equipment failure rather than potential sabotage, which meant they could pay out the claim quickly without a lengthy investigation. The circular nature of the situation was becoming clear. Walter had potentially caused Amanda's accident, then used his expertise to help the insurance investigators understand how such an accident could occur naturally, which allowed him to collect the insurance payout without suspicion. Marcus, there's more correspondence here from some of your father's new business clients. Several of them mention being referred by colleagues in the insurance industry who were impressed by Walter's mechanical knowledge and discretion. Discretion? That's what they wrote. They were impressed by his discretion. I found the most disturbing piece of correspondence at the bottom of the file. A letter from Walter to someone whose name had been blacked out, dated 3 years after Amanda's accident. I want to thank you again for your understanding regarding the unfortunate situation with my family member. Your recommendation that I focus on technical consultation rather than dwelling on past tragedies has been invaluable. My business has thrived, and I believe I have found constructive ways to channel my mechanical expertise. I hope we can continue our mutually beneficial professional relationship. Someone was advising your father about how to handle the aftermath of Amanda's accident, I said. Someone who helped him turn the situation into a business opportunity. Marcus returned to his mother's diary, flipping through pages with desperate intensity, as if he could find some entry that would make all of this evidence disappear or transform into something less horrific. Here, he said suddenly. March 1995. I followed Walter to his meeting with the insurance consultant who has been sending him referrals. The man's name is Thompson, the same investigator who originally looked into Amanda's accident. They meet monthly now, always at the same diner, always for exactly 1 hour. I can see them through the window, but I can never get close enough to hear what they discuss. Your mother was watching your father meet regularly with the man who investigated Amanda's accident? For years, apparently. Marcus continued reading. Thompson always brings a briefcase to these meetings, and Walter always leaves with manila envelopes. I suspect Thompson is providing Walter with information about other cases, other accidents, possibly other opportunities for his technical consultation services. The scope of what Lillian had discovered was expanding beyond Amanda's single accident into something that suggested a pattern of collaboration between Walter and people in the insurance industry who had reasons to classify suspicious accidents as mechanical failures rather than potential crimes. Marcus, I said quietly, what if your father didn't just cause Amanda's accident? What if he became part of a system that helped cover up other suspicious accidents? The manila folder I opened next contained something that made my hands shake so violently I nearly dropped it. Inside were surveillance photographs, but these weren't pictures of random people around town. These were photographs of Marcus and me. Marcus, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Your mother was watching us. What do you mean watching us? I spread the photographs across the desk. They showed Marcus and me at various locations around town over the past several years, shopping at the grocery store, eating dinner at restaurants, walking through the park near our house, all taken from a distance with what appeared to be a telephoto lens. Why would Mom be taking pictures of us? Marcus asked, his voice filled with confusion and growing alarm. I found the answer in a section of Lillian's diary that I'd missed earlier, entries dated from just a few years ago. February 2018, I read aloud. I need to make sure that Walter never shows Rebecca the same attention he gave Amanda. Rebecca is a good woman, and she loves Marcus genuinely. I cannot let Walter destroy another daughter-in-law. What does that mean? The same attention he gave Amanda? I turned the page and found more disturbing entries. March 2018. Walter has started asking Rebecca about her car maintenance schedule. He offered to check her brake fluid last weekend. I told him I had already arranged for Rebecca's car to be serviced at the dealership, but he seemed disappointed. I need to watch him more carefully. Marcus sank back into his chair, the color draining from his face. Mom thought Dad was planning to hurt you? April 2018. Walter suggested that Rebecca might benefit from having a life insurance policy since she doesn't have children, and Marcus would need financial security if something happened to her. He offered to help her research policies and even volunteered to pay the premiums as a family gift. I convinced Rebecca to wait until she was older, but Walter brought up the subject 3 more times this month. I remembered those conversations. Walter had indeed suggested life insurance, and I'd thought he was being thoughtful about our financial planning. Lillian had convinced me to postpone the decision, saying that life insurance was something to consider later in life when health issues became more concerning. May 2018. Rebecca mentioned that her car has been making strange noises when she brakes. Walter immediately volunteered to look at it, said he could fix the problem easily without the expense of taking it to a shop. I told Rebecca that modern cars require specialized diagnostic equipment and insisted she take it to the dealership instead. Walter seemed angry about my interference. "The brake noise," I said, the memory coming back to me clearly. I remember that. Walter was really insistent about fixing my car himself. "You backed up your mother's suggestion about using the dealership, because I trusted Mom's judgment about car repairs. But your mother wasn't concerned about your technical expertise. She was concerned about Walter's intentions." I found more entries that painted an increasingly disturbing picture of Walter's interest in my welfare during the final years of his life. June 2018. Walter has started making comments about Rebecca's driving habits. He says she takes too many risks, drives too fast, doesn't pay attention to road conditions. Yesterday, he suggested that Rebecca might need defensive driving lessons, or perhaps should consider giving up driving altogether and relying on Marcus for transportation. I reminded him that Rebecca has been driving for over 20 years without incident, but he seems focused on the idea that she's accident-prone. "Dad never said anything to me about your driving being dangerous," Marcus said, "because your mother was running interference between Walter and me without either of us knowing it." The photographs began to make more sense as I studied them more carefully. They weren't random surveillance pictures. They were documentation of my activities, my routines, my vulnerabilities. Lillian had been tracking my movements not to spy on me, but to protect me from her own husband. July 2018. Walter asked Rebecca about her work schedule at the library, specifically which days she works late and has to drive home alone after dark. He expressed concern about her safety and suggested she should always call Marcus to escort her to her car. When Rebecca mentioned that she feels perfectly safe in our small town, Walter told her several stories about women who had been attacked in parking lots. I could see that he was trying to make her afraid, to make her more dependent on family protection. "He was trying to isolate you," Marcus said, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. "Dad was trying to make you afraid, to be independent. The same way he might have isolated Amanda before her accident." I found a folder labeled AH Pre-Incident Patterns that I hadn't noticed before. Inside were notes about Amanda's final months that mirrored Walter's behavior toward me. September 1992. Walter has become very concerned about Amanda's car. He checks her brake fluid weekly and insists on inspecting her tires every few days. Amanda says it makes her feel cared for, but I think Walter is creating dependency while learning her vehicle maintenance patterns. The parallels were unmistakable. Walter had used the same tactics with Amanda that he'd started using with me. Express concern about safety, offer to handle mechanical issues personally, create situations where the woman felt vulnerable and dependent on family protection. September 1992. Walter convinced Amanda to increase her life insurance coverage, saying that young couples need financial protection in case of unexpected tragedy. Amanda agreed because she trusts Walter's business judgment, but the policy amount seems excessive for their age and income level. "The life insurance," Marcus said quietly. "Dad used the same approach with both Amanda and you, but your mother prevented him from succeeding with me." I found one final section of photographs that made everything horrifyingly clear. These pictures showed Walter near my car, near the library where I worked, near places where I regularly spent time alone. The dates on the photographs corresponded with Lillian's diary entries about Walter's increased interest in my activities and safety. August 2018. I followed Walter when he said he was going to the hardware store. Instead, he drove to the library and spent 30 minutes walking around Rebecca's car in the parking lot. When I confronted him later, he claimed he had been checking to make sure her vehicle was secure, but he had no reasonable explanation for why he hadn't mentioned this to either Rebecca or Marcus. "Mom was following Dad while Dad was stalking you," Marcus said, his voice filled with horror. "She was protecting me from her own husband." The final entry in that section of the diary was dated just weeks before Walter passed away. November 2018. Walter's health is declining rapidly, but his obsession with Rebecca has only intensified. Yesterday, he asked Marcus whether Rebecca had made a will, whether she had named Marcus as her beneficiary, whether she had any family members who might contest an inheritance. I realized that Walter is planning Rebecca's accident just like he planned Amanda's. I cannot let this happen again. I need to find a way to protect Rebecca without exposing Marcus to the truth about his father. Marcus stood up abruptly, and walked to the far corner of the room, pressing his forehead against the wall of newspaper clippings. My father was planning to cause an accident that would harm you, just like he caused the accident that took Amanda from me. But he passed away before he could act on those plans, and Mom spent the last months of his life protecting you from him. I gathered all of the photographs and documents back into their respective folders, my hands still trembling as I tried to process the magnitude of what Lillian had sacrificed to keep our family safe. Marcus, your mother saved my life. Nima, she saved your life by staying married to someone she suspected of causing Amanda's accident, by living with a man she believed was planning to hurt you, by keeping secrets that must have been torture to carry alone. And she documented everything in case something happened to her before she could tell us the truth. The weight of Lillian's sacrifice was beginning to settle over both of us. She had chosen to protect her family by staying silent about her husband's potential crimes, but she had also chosen to protect me by standing between Walter and his apparent plans for another convenient accident. What do we do now? Marcus asked, his voice hollow with exhaustion and grief. I don't know, I admitted, but I think we need to understand the complete truth before we decide anything. In the bottom drawer of Lillian's desk, I discovered something that changed everything we thought we understood about the situation. A thick manila envelope marked "Emergency Instructions, open only after my death," in Lillian's unmistakable handwriting. Inside the envelope was a letter addressed to both Marcus and me, along with several documents that appeared to be official legal papers. Marcus, your mother left us specific instructions about what to do with her investigation. Marcus looked up from the corner where he'd been standing in stunned silence, his face etched with exhaustion and emotional overload. Instructions for what? I opened the letter and began reading Lillian's final words to us. My dear Marcus and Rebecca, if you're reading this, then I have passed away, and you have finally discovered the room I have kept locked for 15 years. I know this discovery must be overwhelming and confusing, but I need you to understand why I chose to keep these secrets while I was alive. Keep reading, Marcus said, moving closer to hear his mother's explanation. I have spent 23 years living with the knowledge that Walter caused Amanda's accident deliberately. I never reported my suspicions to the police because I had no physical evidence that would stand up in court, only circumstantial observations and documented patterns that could be explained away by clever attorneys. But she had all this evidence, Marcus protested. The insurance connections, the business records, the surveillance photos. The evidence I collected would not have been sufficient for criminal prosecution, I continued reading. Walter was careful to ensure that his involvement could never be proven definitively. However, I believe my documentation serves a different purpose. It provides context for understanding what really happened to Amanda and why Walter needed to be watched carefully around other potential victims. I found the most shocking revelation in the next paragraph of Lillian's letter. I must tell you something that will be difficult to hear. Walter never successfully carried out his plans regarding Rebecca because Amanda is still alive. Marcus and I stared at each other in complete silence for several moments, both of us trying to process what we just read. That's impossible, Marcus said finally. I was at Amanda's funeral. We buried her. Keep reading, I said, though my own hands were shaking as I turned to the next page of the letter. Amanda did not perish in the car accident on October 12, 1992. The accident was real, but Amanda survived with serious injuries. When she realized during her recovery that someone had deliberately tampered with her brakes, she came to me for help, rather than going to the police. What? Why would she come to you instead of the authorities? Amanda was afraid that if she accused Walter publicly without absolute proof, he might make another attempt on her life that would be more successful. We decided together that the safest course of action would be to let everyone believe she had passed away in the accident, while she recovered secretly, and we gathered evidence against Walter. The room felt like it was spinning around me as I tried to comprehend what Lillian was revealing. Amanda hadn't perished in the car accident. She had been alive for the past 23 years, while Marcus grieved her loss and eventually married me. Amanda spent several months recovering from her injuries at a private facility out of state, where she used a different identity to protect her safety. During her recovery, we worked together to document Walter's involvement in tampering with her vehicle and to understand the broader network of people who were helping him cover up suspicious accidents. A network of people? I asked, looking at Marcus, who appeared to be in shock. What we discovered was more extensive than either of us had originally suspected. Walter was part of a group that included insurance investigators, auto repair shop owners, and legal professionals who worked together to classify deliberate accidents as equipment failures or driver error. They were essentially running a service that helped people eliminate inconvenient family members while collecting insurance payouts. The scope of what Lillian was describing was staggering. Walter hadn't been acting alone. He'd been part of an organized effort to commit insurance fraud through staged accidents. Amanda and I spent 3 years collecting evidence against this network, working with federal investigators who were already suspicious about patterns of unusual accidents in our region. Amanda provided testimony that helped convict several members of the group, but Walter was never formally charged because Amanda's supposed death made her testimony inadmissible in court. So, Amanda was working with federal investigators this entire time? After the federal investigation concluded, Amanda chose to remain in witness protection rather than return to her previous life. She felt that coming back would put both herself and Marcus in danger from other members of the network who had never been caught. I found photographs tucked into the envelope that showed a woman who looked like Amanda, but with different hair and clothing, standing next to what appeared to be federal agents. The pictures were dated from the mid-1990s. Amanda has been living in witness protection for 20 years under the name Patricia Williams. She works as a counselor, helping other women who have survived domestic violence and staged accidents. She has wanted to contact Marcus many times over the years, but the federal marshals advised against any communication that might compromise her safety or reveal her location. Marcus sat down heavily in his mother's chair, his face pale and his breathing shallow. Amanda has been alive this entire time. She's been alive while I mourned her, while I met you, while we got married. I know this information will be shocking and painful for both of you, Lillian's letter continued. Marcus, I am sorry that you have spent 23 years believing you lost the love of your life when actually she was alive and safe but unable to return to you. Rebecca, I am sorry that you entered into marriage without knowing that your husband's first wife was still living. Why didn't she tell us while she was alive? Marcus asked, his voice filled with anguish. Why did Mom wait until after her death to reveal all of this? I found the answer in the next section of the letter. I could not tell you the truth while Walter was alive because it would have put Amanda in immediate danger. Walter believed his plan had succeeded, and as long as he thought Amanda was gone, he had no reason to look for her. If he had discovered that she was alive and working with federal investigators, he would have found a way to complete what he started. And after Walter passed away? After Walter's death, I intended to arrange a reunion between Amanda and Marcus, with Rebecca's understanding and support. However, my own health declined rapidly, and I realized that I would not live long enough to handle this delicate situation properly. Instead, I have provided you with Amanda's current contact information through the Federal Witness Protection Program, so you can make your own decisions about whether and how to reconnect. At the bottom of the envelope, I found a business card for a federal marshal, along with a case number and instructions for making contact with someone in witness protection named Patricia Williams. She's really alive, Marcus said, staring at the business card. Amanda is really alive, and she's been in hiding for 23 years because your father tried to eliminate her for insurance money. While I married you believing I was a widower, the complexity of the situation was overwhelming. Marcus had been living as a widower for 2 decades, grieving a woman who was actually alive but unable to return. I had married a man I thought was free to remarry, but whose first wife had been forced into hiding rather than actually passing away. Marcus, I said carefully, what does this mean for us? For our marriage? He looked at me with an expression that contained love, confusion, and agonizing uncertainty. I don't know, Becca. I honestly don't know. The silence in Lillian's secret room stretched between Marcus and me like a chasm that seemed impossible to bridge. I sat holding the federal marshal's business card while my husband stared at the wall of newspaper clippings, both of us struggling to process the magnitude of what we'd discovered. 23 years, Marcus said finally, his voice barely audible. Amanda has been alive for 23 years while I've been living as a widower. And while you've been married to me for 15 of those years, Becca, I need you to understand something. Marcus turned to face me, his eyes filled with tears. When I married you, I believed with absolute certainty that Amanda was gone. I wasn't trying to replace her or forget her, but I had genuinely moved forward with my life. I know that. I've never doubted your sincerity about our marriage. But now you have to decide what Amanda's survival means for your feelings about our relationship. Marcus picked up another section of his mother's documentation, this one containing what appeared to be recent correspondence. Becca, there's more here. Letters between Mom and Amanda from just last year. Recent letters? Listen to this. It's from Amanda to Mom, dated 8 months ago. Dear Lillian, I hope this letter finds you in good health. I know that our correspondence must be difficult for you, knowing what you know about Marcus and Rebecca's marriage. I want you to understand that I harbor no resentment toward Marcus for moving on with his life. After 20 years in witness protection, I have also built a new life that brings me satisfaction and purpose. She's moved on too. I have found meaningful work helping other women who have survived domestic violence and staged accidents. I have also developed close friendships and professional relationships that have given me a sense of family and community. While I will always care about Marcus and appreciate the love we shared when we were young, I do not expect or desire to resume our marriage after so many years apart. I felt a wave of relief, followed immediately by guilt about feeling relieved. Amanda's letter suggested that she wasn't planning to return and reclaim her place in Marcus's life, but I hated myself for being grateful that a woman who'd suffered so much wouldn't be adding complications to my marriage. What else does she say? I asked. Marcus continued reading. I am writing to ask you to stop trying to arrange a reunion between Marcus and me. I understand that you feel guilty about the secrets you've kept, but I believe that some chapters of our lives are meant to remain closed. Marcus has built a marriage with Rebecca that appears to be happy and stable. I have built a new identity and career that fulfill me. Reopening old wounds would benefit no one. So Amanda doesn't want to see you? Apparently not. But there's more. Marcus flipped to another letter. However, I do think Marcus and Rebecca deserve to know the truth about what happened to me, and about Walter's involvement in staging my accident. They should understand that Lillian has spent decades protecting them from a dangerous man, and that Rebecca was never in any real danger once Walter passed away. Most importantly, they should know that their marriage is built on genuine love rather than deception. She wants us to know the truth, but she doesn't want to be part of our lives going forward. It seems that way. I found another letter, this one from Lillian to Amanda, that provided more context about the situation. Dear Amanda, I read aloud, I understand your reluctance to complicate Marcus and Rebecca's marriage by revealing your survival. However, I am concerned that Rebecca has a right to know that Marcus's first wife is still alive, even if you have no intention of returning to your previous life. Rebecca entered into marriage believing she was Marcus's second chance at love, not knowing that his first love was forced into hiding rather than actually lost. Your mother was worried about my right to informed consent about our marriage. What do you mean? I mean that she thought I deserved to know that I was married to a man whose first wife was still alive, even if that woman had no plans to return. Marcus found Lillian's final letter to Amanda, dated just 3 months before her death. Amanda, my health is failing rapidly, and I will not live much longer. I have decided to leave all of my documentation about Walter's crimes and your survival for Marcus and Rebecca to discover after my death. I believe they are both mature enough to handle the truth and make their own decisions about how to process this information. So your mother planned for us to find out this way. She planned for us to discover everything together, after both she and my father were gone and couldn't be hurt by the revelations. I looked around the room at the evidence of Lillian's decades-long investigation, her careful documentation of Walter's crimes, her protection of Amanda's secret, and her vigilant guardianship of my safety. The scope of what she'd sacrificed for our family was staggering. Marcus, your mother carried all of this alone for 23 years. The knowledge that Walter had tried to eliminate Amanda, the secret of Amanda's survival, the responsibility of protecting me from Walter's later plans. She never told anyone what she knew because she was protecting all of us. And she died still carrying those secrets because she loved us enough to bear that burden herself. Marcus stood up and walked to the wall where Amanda's newspaper photos were displayed, studying the face of the woman he'd thought he'd lost decades ago. Becca, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. What? Does knowing that Amanda is alive change how you feel about our marriage? Do you feel like you've been living a lie for 15 years? I considered his question carefully before answering. The truth was complicated and painful, but Marcus deserved honesty. I feel like I've been living a situation that was more complex than either of us understood, but I don't feel like our marriage itself was a lie. You genuinely believed you were free to marry me. I genuinely believed I was marrying a man who had lost his first wife. Our feelings for each other have been authentic, even if the circumstances were more complicated than we knew. But does it change anything for you, knowing that Amanda is alive? It changes my understanding of our history, but it doesn't change my feelings about our future. Amanda has made it clear that she doesn't want to be part of your life. She's built a new identity and doesn't want to return to her old one. In practical terms, her survival doesn't affect our marriage unless you want it to. What do you mean, unless I want it to? I mean that you have to decide whether knowing Amanda is alive changes your feelings about being married to me. Do you still want to be my husband? Or do you feel like you need to explore what might be possible with Amanda now that you know she's not gone? Marcus was quiet for a long time, his eyes moving from Amanda's photographs to the evidence of his father's crimes, to the documentation of his mother's sacrifices. Becca, I fell in love with Amanda when I was 22 years old. We had 3 years together before she was forced to disappear from my life. I've spent the last 23 years building a completely different life, first as a man learning to live with grief, and then as a man who found love again with you. And you're not my second choice or my consolation prize. You're the woman I chose to build a life with when I was mature enough to understand what real partnership means. Amanda and I were young people who never got the chance to grow up together. You and I have grown up together. But do you want to contact Amanda? Do you want to know about the life she's built? Marcus looked at the federal marshal's business card that I was still holding. I think I want to write her a letter thanking her for her sacrifice and telling her that I'm glad she survived. But I don't want to reconnect with her romantically or try to rebuild something that ended decades ago. Are you sure? I'm sure that I want to stay married to you, if you want to stay married to me. 3 days later, Marcus and I sat at our kitchen table with a federal marshal named Janet Rodriguez, who had driven down from the regional office to discuss the evidence we'd discovered in Lillian's secret room. Agent Rodriguez was a compact woman in her 50s with graying hair and the kind of direct gaze that suggested she'd seen every variety of human deception during her career. Mrs. Harrison, Mr. Harrison, she began formally, I've reviewed the documentation you provided, and I need to tell you that what your mother-in-law collected represents some of the most comprehensive evidence we've ever seen regarding the Harrison insurance fraud network. The Harrison network? I repeated. You named it after Walter? We named it after the family surname because Walter Harrison was one of the primary coordinators, but the network included dozens of participants across multiple states. Your mother-in-law's investigation helped us understand connections that our federal task force had been trying to piece together for years. Marcus leaned forward across the table. How long has the federal government been investigating my father's activities? Since 1994, when patterns of suspicious accidents began appearing in insurance databases. However, we never had enough evidence to pursue criminal charges against Walter Harrison, specifically because most of our witnesses either disappeared or refused to testify. Because they were afraid? Because they were offered financial incentives to remain silent, or because they suffered accidents similar to what happened to your first wife. Agent Rodriguez pulled out a thick folder containing what appeared to be official case files. Amanda Harrison, now Patricia Williams, has been one of our most valuable protected witnesses. Her testimony helped us prosecute 17 members of the fraud network, including insurance investigators, auto mechanics, and legal professionals who were facilitating staged accidents for financial gain. 17 people, Marcus said, his voice filled with shock. How many people were involved in this? The network operated for nearly 15 years before we dismantled it. Conservative estimates suggest they were responsible for over 40 suspicious accidents that were classified as equipment failures or driver error, resulting in insurance payouts exceeding $12 million. 40 accidents, I repeated, the magnitude of the criminal enterprise beginning to sink in. How many people were hurt? 23 fatalities, 11 serious injuries, and 6 cases where the intended victim survived and eventually provided testimony. Amanda was one of the survivors who helped us understand how the network operated. Agent Rodriguez opened another section of her files, showing us photographs and documents that looked similar to what Lillian had collected. Your mother-in-law's investigation was actually more thorough than our own in many respects. She documented behavioral patterns, financial transactions, and personal relationships that our agents were never able to observe directly. Because she lived with Walter, Marcus said quietly. She could watch him in ways that federal investigators couldn't. Exactly. And her documentation of Walter's later interest in Mrs. Harrison provided crucial evidence about how network members identified and targeted new victims. So Rebecca really was in danger? Based on the patterns your mother-in-law documented, yes. Walter Harrison appeared to be following the same preparation process with your wife that he used with Amanda Harrison in 1992. I felt a chill as I realized how close I might have come to suffering Amanda's fate. If not for Lillian's intervention and Walter's illness, I could have found myself in a staged accident designed to look like mechanical failure. Agent Rodriguez, I said, what happened to the other members of the network after Walter passed away? Most were either convicted and imprisoned, or they died of natural causes over the years. However, a few lower-level participants were never identified or prosecuted. Are they still dangerous? Unlikely. The network required coordination between insurance investigators, auto mechanics, and legal professionals to function effectively. With the primary coordinators gone and the federal investigation concluded, the remaining individuals don't pose a significant threat. Marcus asked the question that had been weighing on both of our minds since we'd discovered his mother's investigation. What happens now? Do we have any legal obligations regarding the evidence Mom collected? Agent Rodriguez considered her answer carefully before responding. Legally, you have no obligation to pursue further action. Walter Harrison is deceased, most of his co-conspirators have been prosecuted, and the federal investigation concluded several years ago. However, your mother-in-law's documentation could be valuable for civil lawsuits filed by families of other victims. Civil lawsuits? Families seeking damages from insurance companies that paid out fraudulent claims or from the estates of network members. Your mother-in-law's evidence could help establish patterns of criminal behavior that support those cases. But we're not required to participate? Not required, but Patricia Williams has asked me to discuss that possibility with you. I looked at Marcus, who seemed surprised by the mention of Amanda's involvement. Amanda wants us to help with civil lawsuits? Agent Rodriguez nodded. She believes that Walter Harrison's victims' families deserve compensation for their losses and that your mother-in-law's documentation could be crucial for proving the scope of the criminal network's activities. What would that involve? Providing copies of the evidence to attorneys representing victims' families and potentially testifying about your mother-in-law's investigation process if cases go to trial. Marcus was quiet for several minutes, clearly struggling with the decision about whether to make his family's private trauma part of public legal proceedings. If we agree to help with civil lawsuits, would that require us to have contact with Amanda? Not necessarily. Patricia Williams could provide testimony independently, and your contribution would focus on your mother-in-law's investigation rather than your personal relationships. Agent Rodriguez, I said, can you tell us anything about Amanda's current life? Is she happy? Has she been able to build a fulfilling life despite everything she's been through? I can tell you that Patricia Williams has become one of the most effective advocates for domestic violence survivors in the Pacific Northwest. She's helped dozens of women escape dangerous situations and rebuild their lives safely. Her experience with surviving a staged accident and living in witness protection has given her unique insights into helping other women who face similar threats. So she's found meaningful work that grew out of her own trauma. She's transformed her survival into service for other people facing similar dangers. The information about Amanda's current life made me feel better about the complicated situation our family was navigating. Knowing that she'd built a fulfilling career helping other women suggested that her forced disappearance had led to something positive rather than just years of hiding and fear. Marcus, I said, what do you think about helping with the civil lawsuits? He considered the question while staring out our kitchen window at the garden that Lillian had helped us plant several years ago. I think Mom spent 23 years documenting evidence because she believed the victims' families deserved justice, even if she couldn't pursue that justice while Dad was alive. If her investigation can help other families get compensation for their losses, then I think we should honor her work by making it available. even if it means our family's private business becomes part of public legal proceedings? Mom was willing to sacrifice her peace of mind to protect other people from Dad's network. I think the least we can do is sacrifice some privacy to help the families of people who weren't as fortunate as Amanda. Agent Rodriguez gathered her files and prepared to leave, but not before providing us with contact information for the attorneys handling victims' civil cases. Mrs. Harrison, Mr. Harrison, I want you to know that what your mother-in-law did required extraordinary courage. She spent decades living with a dangerous man while secretly documenting evidence that would eventually help bring justice to his victims. Her sacrifice saved lives, including yours, Mrs. Harrison. As we watched Agent Rodriguez drive away, Marcus and I stood in our doorway holding copies of the legal documents that would allow Lillian's investigation to help other families seek justice for their losses. Becca, Marcus said quietly, are you ready to honor my mother's work by making it public? I'm ready to help other families get the justice that Lillian couldn't pursue for Amanda while she was alive, even if it means testifying about everything we discovered in Mom's secret room. Especially then, your mother kept those secrets to protect us, but she documented them so they could eventually be used to help other people. I think it's time to let her work serve the purpose she always intended. 2 weeks after our meeting with Agent Rodriguez, Marcus sat at our kitchen table carefully composing a letter that would close a chapter of our lives that had been frozen in time for 23 years. Through the window, I could see him pause occasionally to stare at Lillian's garden, gathering his thoughts before continuing to write. What are you saying to her? I asked, setting a cup of coffee beside his notebook. I'm trying to thank her for surviving, for helping to bring justice to my father's victims, and for building a life that gives meaning to what she suffered. And I'm trying to let her know that I'm grateful she made the choice not to return to a life that no longer exists. I read over his shoulder as he wrote in his careful handwriting, Dear Patricia, I hope it's appropriate for me to use the name you've chosen for your new life, rather than the name you used when we were young together. Agent Rodriguez gave me your permission to write this letter, and I want you to know how much it means to me that you're willing to receive it. That's a good opening, I said. Marcus continued writing while I prepared lunch, both of us settling into the comfortable routine we'd developed over 15 years of marriage. I need you to understand that learning about your survival has been both a shock and a relief. A shock because I've spent 23 years believing you were gone, but a relief because the woman I loved when I was young is alive and has built a life that gives her satisfaction and purpose. You're really not going to ask to see her? No. Agent Rodriguez explained that Patricia Williams has specifically requested no personal contact, and I think she's right to want that boundary. Marcus paused in his writing to look at me with the expression that had convinced me to marry him 15 years ago. Honest, thoughtful, and completely focused on our life together rather than what might have been. Becca, I loved Amanda when we were in our 20s, but I don't know Patricia Williams at all. She's spent more years building her new life than she spent living her original life. I'm not the same person I was at 22 either. What else are you telling her? Marcus showed me the next paragraph of his letter. I want you to know that my marriage to Rebecca is not a substitute for what you and I had together, but rather a completely separate relationship that has grown from shared experiences, mutual respect, and genuine compatibility. Rebecca and I have built something together that belongs to who we are now, not who we were in our youth. I love that paragraph. I also want you to know that my mother's sacrifice in keeping your secret has shown me what real love looks like. She lived with knowledge that must have been torture to carry alone, but she chose to protect both of us rather than seek personal relief by revealing the truth. Her example has taught me that love sometimes means making difficult choices to protect other people's welfare rather than satisfying your own needs. I felt tears forming as I realized how profoundly Lillian's example had shaped Marcus's understanding of love and sacrifice. His willingness to let Amanda remain in her new life without trying to reconnect with her was itself a demonstration of the kind of selfless love that Lillian had modeled. What about the legal situation? Marcus turned to a fresh page to address the civil lawsuits that several victims' families were pursuing. Agent Rodriguez tells me that you've agreed to testify in the civil cases against my father's estate and his co-conspirators. I want you to know that Rebecca and I have also agreed to provide my mother's documentation and testify about her investigation. We believe that the families of people who were hurt by my father's network deserve compensation for their losses. Are you nervous about testifying? I'm nervous about having our family's private trauma become part of public legal proceedings. But I'm more concerned about honoring your mother's work by making sure it serves the purpose she always intended, which was protecting other people from dangerous individuals who use insurance fraud to eliminate inconvenient family members. Marcus finished his letter with a paragraph that made me proud to be married to a man capable of such emotional maturity. Patricia, I hope your work helping other women who have survived domestic violence continues to be fulfilling and meaningful. I hope you have found people in your life who appreciate you for who you've become rather than who you used to be. And I hope you know that by choosing to rebuild your life rather than return to your old one, you've given both Rebecca and me the gift of certainty about our own relationship. That's beautiful, Marcus. It's honest. Her choice to remain Patricia Williams instead of trying to become Amanda Harrison again has eliminated any confusion about where my loyalties should be. That afternoon, Marcus drove to the post office to send his letter through the federal marshal's office, while I spent time in Lillian's garden thinking about the extraordinary woman who had shaped our lives in ways we were only beginning to understand. Lillian had spent 23 years keeping secrets that protected her family, documenting evidence that would eventually bring justice to victims of her husband's crimes, and watching over my safety without ever revealing the danger I'd been in. Her sacrifice had been invisible and unacknowledged until after her death, when her carefully preserved evidence finally told the story of her decades-long investigation. When Marcus returned from the post office, he found me sitting in the garden beside the roses that Lillian had planted the year after Walter passed away. "Do you think she knew?" I asked him. "Do you think your mother knew that we would eventually discover her secret room and learn the truth about everything? I think she planned for us to find her investigation after she was gone. The room was locked during her lifetime to protect us from knowledge we couldn't handle while Dad was alive. But she documented everything carefully and left specific instructions because she wanted us to understand what she'd sacrificed for our family. And she wanted us to use her evidence to help other people." Exactly. Marcus sat beside me on the garden bench that he'd built the summer after we were married. "Becca, do you think we would have made different choices if we'd known the truth about Amanda while your mother was still alive? I think we would have been terrified for Amanda's safety and angry about your father's crimes, but I don't think it would have changed our feelings about our marriage. Because our relationship was built on who we actually are, not on assumptions about your past. Learning that Amanda was alive doesn't change the fact that you and I chose each other and built something meaningful together. Even though you married me believing I was a widower when I was technically still married to someone in witness protection? Marcus, you believed you were a widower. Amanda chose to remain legally married to you while living as Patricia Williams, because dissolving the marriage would have required legal proceedings that might have compromised her safety. The technical legal situation doesn't reflect the emotional reality of what happened to your family. That evening we received a phone call from one of the attorneys handling civil lawsuits against Walter's estate. "Mr. Harrison, Mrs. Harrison, we've received preliminary approval from the court to use your mother-in-law's investigation as evidence in our cases. Her documentation is some of the most comprehensive evidence we've ever seen regarding the scope and duration of the insurance fraud network." "What does that mean for the families of victims?" Marcus asked. "It means we can now demonstrate that the network operated for much longer than federal investigators originally understood, which significantly increases the potential damages that insurance companies and estate holdings will be required to pay. And for us, it means your mother-in-law's 23 years of careful investigation will finally serve the purpose she always intended, protecting other families from predators who use staged accidents to eliminate inconvenient relatives." After we hung up the phone, Marcus and I sat in our living room looking through some of Lillian's documentation one final time before sending it to the attorneys. "Your mother saved so many lives," I said, studying her careful notes about Walter's behavioral patterns and criminal connections. "She saved your life specifically, and other people's lives generally. And she did it by choosing to carry terrible knowledge alone rather than burden us with information we couldn't handle. The ultimate act of protective love." That night, as we prepared for bed, Marcus asked me a question that had been weighing on his mind since we'd discovered his mother's investigation. "Becca, Knowing everything we know now about my family's history, do you have any regrets about marrying me? None, I answered without hesitation. I have sadness about what happened to Amanda, anger about your father's crimes, and admiration for your mother's sacrifice, but I have no regrets about building a life with you. Even knowing that our marriage began while my first wife was alive in witness protection? Especially knowing that, because it means our relationship survived the most complicated circumstances imaginable and emerged stronger rather than weaker. 6 months after mailing the letter to Amanda, Marcus and I stood outside the federal courthouse where we had just finished testifying in the final civil lawsuit against Walter Harrison's estate. The proceedings had taken most of the day, but the attorney representing the victims' families had assured us that Lillian's documentation would likely result in significant settlements for people who had suffered losses due to the insurance fraud network. "It's over," Marcus said quietly as we walked down the courthouse steps together. "All of it. The investigation, the trials, the testimony. Mom's work is finally complete. How do you feel about that?" "Relieved, proud of what she accomplished, grateful that her sacrifice is finally helping the people she always wanted to protect." We had received a brief response to Marcus's letter through Agent Rodriguez about a month after he'd sent it. Amanda had thanked him for his understanding about her decision to remain in her new life, and she had expressed gratitude that Marcus and I were willing to make Lillian's investigation available for the civil proceedings. Her letter had been warm but formal, clearly establishing that she considered their relationship to be peacefully concluded rather than interrupted. "Mr. Harrison, Mrs. Harrison," called a voice behind us as we reached our car. We turned to see a woman in her 50s approaching us with a hesitant expression. She was well-dressed and carried herself with the composure of someone accustomed to difficult conversations. "My name is Carol Brennan," she said. "My daughter Jennifer was one of the victims of the Harrison network. She was 26 when her car accident was staged to look like brake failure." Marcus and I exchanged glances, both of us understanding immediately why Carol had approached us. "Mrs. Brennan," I said gently, "we're so sorry for your loss. I wanted to thank you personally for providing your mother-in-law's evidence for our lawsuit. Without her investigation, we would never have been able to prove that Jennifer's accident was deliberate. My mother would have been honored to know that her work helped bring some measure of justice for your daughter," Marcus replied. Carol reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope. "I also wanted to give you something that I think your mother-in-law would have wanted you to have." Inside the envelope was a photograph of a young woman with dark hair and a bright smile, along with what appeared to be a newspaper clipping dated from 1994. "This is Jennifer," Carol explained. "She was a teacher, recently married, planning to start a family. The insurance investigator convinced us that her accident was due to a manufacturing defect, and we spent years believing that her passing was just a tragic coincidence." "What changed?" I asked. "Your mother-in-law's documentation included evidence that Jennifer's accident followed the same pattern as Amanda Harrison's and several other victims. The same auto repair shop, the same insurance investigator, the same type of brake tampering designed to look like equipment failure." Marcus studied the photograph of Jennifer Brennan, a young woman whose life had been cut short by the same criminal network that had forced Amanda into hiding. "Mrs. Brennan, how many families are receiving settlements because of my mother's investigation?" 17 families whose loved ones were hurt by the Harrison network. The total settlement amount is approaching $8 million. The magnitude of what Lillian's quiet investigation had accomplished was staggering. Her refusal to report her suspicions about Walter while he was alive had ultimately led to justice for dozens of victims and financial compensation for their families. "She would have been amazed to know that her work would help so many people," I said. "Mrs. Harrison, your mother-in-law was a hero in the truest sense. She lived with dangerous knowledge for over 20 years, protecting her own family while documenting evidence that would eventually help all of our families get justice." Carol returned Jennifer's photograph to the envelope and handed it back to us. "I wanted you to see Jennifer's face so you would know that your mother-in-law's sacrifice helped a real person with a real family who loved her. Jennifer's story won't be forgotten now, and neither will your mother-in-law's courage in making sure the truth was preserved." As Carol walked away, Marcus and I stood beside our car in the courthouse parking lot, holding the photograph of another young woman whose life had been stolen by Walter's criminal network. 17 families, Marcus said. Mom's investigation helped 17 families get answers about what really happened to their loved ones. and prevented who knows how many future victims by exposing the network's methods. She saved Amanda's life, protected your safety, brought justice to Walter's victims, and ensured that other families wouldn't suffer the same losses. We drove home in contemplative silence, both of us processing the conclusion of a legal battle that had consumed the past 6 months of our lives. When we arrived at our house, we found a package waiting on our front porch with no return address. Inside the package was a letter and a small wooden jewelry box. The letter was from Amanda, sent through Agent Rodriguez, but containing a more personal message than her previous correspondence. "Dear Marcus and Rebecca," I read aloud, "I wanted to send you something to mark the conclusion of the civil trials and the completion of Lillian's investigation. This jewelry box belonged to my grandmother and was one of the few personal items I was able to take with me when I entered witness protection. I would like Rebecca to have it, not as a reminder of who I used to be, but as a symbol of new beginnings that can grow from difficult circumstances. She's giving me a family heirloom?" Marcus opened the wooden box to reveal a simple but elegant pearl necklace nestled inside. "The pearls represent something beautiful that develops through pressure and difficulty," I continued reading from Amanda's letter. "I hope they will remind you that the strongest relationships are often those that survive challenging circumstances and emerge more precious because of what they have endured." "She's blessing our marriage," Marcus said quietly. "I believe so." The letter concluded with a paragraph that brought tears to both of our eyes. "Please know that learning about your marriage and seeing evidence of your genuine partnership has brought me peace about the choices I made 23 years ago. I could not have returned to my old life as Amanda Harrison, but knowing that Marcus found authentic love with someone who appreciates him for who he has become rather than who he used to be gives meaning to the sacrifice I made in disappearing. Thank you for honoring Lillian's work and for helping other families find justice. I hope you will think of me occasionally as Patricia Williams, a woman who was able to build a meaningful life because your family's courage made survival possible." That evening, Marcus and I sat in Lillian's garden while I wore Amanda's grandmother's pearls, both of us finally at peace with the extraordinary story that had shaped our lives without our knowledge. "Do you think your mother knew how everything would turn out?" I asked. "I think she hoped that her investigation would eventually help other families, but I don't think she could have imagined the scope of what it would accomplish, or that it would lead to Amanda giving us her blessing. Mom would have been amazed by Amanda's generosity in letting us know that she's happy we found each other. We had learned that some secrets are kept not to deceive, but to protect. Some love expresses itself through sacrifice rather than possession. And some investigations require decades of patient documentation before they can serve their intended purpose. My mother-in-law forbade me from cleaning one room in her house for 15 years. After she passed away, we entered with a flashlight and found walls covered with newspaper clippings about my husband's first wife's death in 1992. Suspicious brake failure. Unsolved case. Lillian's diary revealed the shocking truth. Amanda hadn't passed away in the accident. She and Lillian had staged Amanda's death to help her escape my father-in-law Walter, who had tampered with her brakes as part of an insurance fraud network. Amanda had been alive for 23 years, working with the FBI to bring down the criminal organization, while Lillian spent decades protecting both her secret and my safety from Walter's later plans. The mother-in-law I thought was overprotective was actually a hero who sacrificed everything to keep her family safe while documenting evidence that would eventually bring justice to dozens of victims. Marcus and I had inherited not just a house and garden from Lillian Harrison, but a legacy of courage, sacrifice, and the understanding that love sometimes requires carrying unbearable knowledge alone to protect the people who matter most. Amanda's survival had not threatened our marriage, but had blessed it, and Lillian's investigation had transformed private family trauma into public justice for people whose stories might otherwise have remained untold. As we sat surrounded by roses that Lillian had planted during her years of secret vigilance, Marcus and I knew that we had been shaped by a woman whose love was measured not in words or gestures, but in decades of silent protection that had preserved our safety, our happiness, and our future together. Some rooms are locked to hide shameful secrets. Lillian's room had been locked to protect a profound truth that could only be safely revealed after those who might be hurt by it were beyond the reach of further harm. And in discovering that truth, we had learned what heroism actually looked like when practiced quietly, consistently, and without expectation of recognition or reward. The end.